someone heading the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, you're both in a position where you have the confidence of the states, and you really need to work with that confidence, and yet you have to tackle the many ways in which states exercise impunity, as we know, consistently and systematically. And how does a person in that position really navigate these different currents, where you have to talk to them constructively and yet hold them accountable, and then be subject to very vicious attacks, as we saw in the case of Gaza and Sri Lanka. Mm-hmm. So if you could sort of take us back to those contexts, and what is really that you drew upon, because that was quite outstanding, those two moments in which you stood up for the cause, and yet you did become the center of criticism by some governments.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and particularly holding this conversation with a room full of PhDs and potential PhDs. Why is that important? Because you are on the cusp of addressing new and emerging issues. So throughout my life, I found myself doing many things that were done for the first time. No change happens, especially in well-established societies such as the United Kingdom, such as India, but in South Africa we had an opportunity, a new democracy, to make that change. Let me just refer to how you introduced me about rape and sexual violence against women. You're quite right, they were always treated as collateral damage. In fact, one of the senior European, he was a judge also, he was part of the judgment writing team, and he said to me, let's just give these women a sentence or two and drop that. So there was no charge sheet alleging rape and sexual violence. There's no definition in international law, because it was never prosecuted, and none of these issues were addressed to us by counsel. Usually judges take the lead from what's addressed in the courtroom. So that's the interesting thing. Where did I pick this up? From the witnesses who wanted to tell us what had happened. So it's not merely joining a dialogue, it's for the very first time rape being defined, and it's gender neutral, and it doesn't, it's not a body part definition of penetration. The definition has been adopted in the Rome Statute and by many countries, including the Constitutional Court in South Africa. So it's a conviction of rape as genocide. So much more serious. Nobody can go back on that. But thank you for that introduction. Your question is really, well, how did I make the switch from being a judge who thinks he or she is almighty and can tell people what to do, or can even tell them to stop talking. So I had to become an advocate. And I think it took me 2 years to learn. The first thing I did is looked at this mandate and realized this is a very special mandate. Even the Secretary General said to me he's politically constrained on the things he could raise. But this mandate given to the High Commissioner for Human Rights is to promote and protect all rights of all people all over the world. So it's a very wide mandate, plus the right to development. And so I looked at the mandate and did the maximum I could. What did the ambassadors say to me? It's true, I've been called terrible names. Somebody asked me to look at Google images, my pictures, and many were superimposed with the face of Osama bin Laden. So there are a lot of people there who don't understand human rights. So must that get to you? No. Yeah, the Syrian ambassador called me a lunatic. Someone else said this whole human rights system is a monster that they created because they didn't expect it to go so far. I visited 78 countries. Western states actually were surprised, including this country, were surprised that I was raising human rights issues in their backyard. They said I should be focusing on distant countries where thousands of people are killed. In other words, the developing countries. So donors also had that attitude. What Ambassador said about me is, it's because you are a judge, you listen. So people respect that you hear them out and you understand their point of view. And in that conversational tone, you can set out international standard and values that they signed up to. Who created all these treaties with standards and values? It states. So all my lessons in life were learned when other women opened my eyes. And so with seeing very many women, I realized that they're just victims in this situation. I saw a woman who was pregnant, and she was working at a hospital, and they wouldn't give her leave to go and have the prenatal checkups. So I went to the hospital, where they all gathered, a huge hall, and said, this is what I wanted. This is what I learned about your hospital. So it's learning something, then using the opportunity you have to expose it. So I was the first to put on television my client who had been beaten up very badly before she came to me. She came to me because he wasn't paying child support. She had these huge gashes across her face. So the husband had slashed her, and when her 6-year-old daughter picked up a tissue to wipe the blood off her face, the father said to the daughter, just leave her alone, let her die. So before she came to me, he had already been sentenced and served. Now I'm attending to the child support. So her struggle is still going on. So I called in the TV, which is totally verboden in my system, because lawyers mustn't advertise their work. Now, of course, everybody does, following the American example here. So we are not supposed to go public and speak out and so on. So that's the first. I had the TV camera in, and they filmed her story, and out it went. And the media called me the next day to say their switchboards were all jammed because the public phoned in. They were so shocked about it. So you learn something, you do something about it, and then you help not her, but a whole lot of women. I started a law practice in Durban, and some of the male lawyers said she's very presumptuous. A woman starting a law practice, she's not going to last. But I had little choice. I went from law firm to law firm, who were almost all white law firms. And firstly, they said, no, we can't take you on because we cannot have a situation where a white secretary has to take instructions from a black person. So that's race. And the class discrimination is where they said, yes, well, what kind of business will you bring in? Do you have a father who's in business? But the most hurtful was, I was newly married, and they said, yeah, what if you fall pregnant? So pregnancy is such a bar to entering any profession, including politics. When the change came in South Africa, one of the appointments was of a 35-year-old woman of color as a judge. Her name is Leona Teran, and she was asked in the public questioning, well, you have small children, so how are you going to manage as a judge? And she said, exactly as the other judges manage who have small grandchildren. So, great answer. It's not only about putting women in decision-making positions, because unfortunately the few who get there feel they have to adapt to the male world and act like men. Oh, we shouldn't shed tears, we can't dress as we wish, we have to wear the male suit. No reference to you here.
I don't usually.
No, that's your choice. You wear what you want. And of course, there were all kinds of, and still are, all over the world, males imposing restrictions on what women should be wearing. Yeah, we couldn't wear trousers in a courtroom when we were lawyers, for instance. So they have to have a human rights outlook. They have to understand What's it like for people? So if you take rape and sexual violence, it's bad, it's a crime, it has to stop. But there is an attitude out there from men. It's these women again. It's always their issues. And they all feel that they're under attack. The men feel. So I would bring out, that men and boys were raped more in Bosnia than women. And then you get their interest. So what am I saying here is zero in on the perspective and interest of the people you are addressing, whether it's school children. I addressed the elementary school in Canada because I was asked to. So then you address children's issues and they understand. They understand that they are all right, but there are terrible things going on there and they need to care about this. I have thanked people wherever I went for supporting the struggle against apartheid. You see, and people, in many parts of the world, people identify with that. They saw institutionalized racism as bad. So how come they collectively acted on it? Whether I'm in Colombia or Latin American state or here or in Europe, there's always somebody in that audience who says, yes, I was a child, I stopped eating South African oranges. So zero in on and get that opening so we can engage them.